All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Brooklyn Boxing Podcast. I have a very special guest today, former Muay Thai champion, current gym owner, and also a podcast host of his podcast, Champ Up. So everyone go check that out. Thanks for joining the show today, Chris Romulo.
Thanks for having me, Pat. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining me. I think you got a really interesting story, and Muay Thai right now is very exciting sport. I think it's getting highlighted a little bit due to the success of the UFC and bringing some more eyeballs onto it in the States. But starting out, I'd love to just hear a little bit about kind of your start in Muay Thai. I know you grew up in New York City, first generation. So maybe bring me back into those early years for you growing up in Queens.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, before I got into Muay Thai, I actually started out in Tae Kwon Do. My dad was a Tae Kwon Do stylist back when I was a kid. And I just remember at 8 years old, seeing him leave the house or the apartment every weekend and not really sure where he was going until one day my mom forced him to take me to the Tae Kwon Do dojo with him. So that was around 8 or 9 years old, and that was my first experience with martial arts. And around that time, Bruce Lee was big, and kung fu flicks were on Saturday afternoon and on Channel 5. So I got into martial arts pretty early, but I guess from about 8 years old to about 15, I studied Taekwondo, and then about 15 years old, I kind of gave it up. I just, I became a knucklehead. I started running the streets and making pretty bad decisions. And that eventually led me to Muay Thai at about 20, 21 years old.
So when you were growing up in Queens, your parents were from the Philippines, correct?
Yeah.
So that was obviously, kind of during, Pacquiao's been along so long, but as a kid, so it's like, was boxing, you had some guys that were obviously big names on the rise in the sport. Like, were there different avenues within combat sports that like attracted you from as like a fan, or was it just you kind of got into Taekwondo just because of your dad?
Yeah, it was mainly because of my dad, and again, watching like Bruce Lee and stuff like that. But as I got older, like through the 80s, yeah, definitely, Mike Tyson, was obviously a huge attraction back then. And then eventually in the 90s, when the UFC started coming around, that definitely caught my eye. And I wasn't training, I wasn't doing anything at the time. I just I got lucky, came across, the UFC on a pay-per-view, and I was amazed by it. What's interesting about that was, watching, Royce Gracie choke everybody out. Like I'll remember, I never forget. I remember watching this French Muay Thai fighter, and he was the guy that that really caught my eye during the early UFCs, and he was like kicking people's teeth out of their face, and I was just like, I want to do that.
Yeah, there's that like classic. Was he the guy who fought the sumo wrestler and he kicked him in the face?
Yeah.
I remember that old school fight. That's like an unbelievable moment. Those early UFC days are just insane.
Yeah, that was definitely it. All right, yeah, getting choked out was, Gracie was stopping everybody, but for some reason, because I guess being a Taekwondo guy, watching kicks fly, I was just like, yeah, that looks a lot more appealing than choking.
Yeah, most definitely. There was a big Taekwondo style knockout this past UFC event. I'm blanking on the guy's name. The Baby Beast, maybe, the super big heavyweight, looks heavy set, and then he throws the spinning hook kick knockout against John Vellante, and I was like, oh my god, I didn't know this guy was that agile.
And then pulls off a flip, right?
Yeah. So that must have been nice for you to see that.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of athleticism, I don't think I've ever reached that kind of athleticism.
Yeah, he said it's all in the mind. So he's like, if you believe you're 170 pounds, you are. And he's obviously way above that. So plays into the mindset of these guys and yourself as well. Like obviously you had an amateur career, and one thing I did want to touch on before getting into your success as a pro was your time at Church Street and developing that program there, because that's obviously a big boxing gym in New York and has a ton of history of champions and now all different types of combat sports. So what was it like being a pioneer for Muay Thai and being at such an iconic gym?
Oh man, it's something I'll never forget. The opportunity that Justin Blair, who owned Church Street Boxing Gym at one time, and my coach Jason Stroud, who were guys that really helped me move myself through the sport at a time when Muay Thai wasn't that popular. And Jason, he really, as far as like developing my skills at the time when we met, I was just, I was kind of just training solo at the time. I was trying to figure out my way because I had lost my, not lost, but my original trainer went back off to Thailand and he was doing his thing. And I hadn't really been training consistently. But when I met Jason Stroud down at Church Street, he really, took my skills to the next level. Funny story about that was I was actually building the Muay Thai program down at Church Street Boxing Gym. And Jason Stroud came in like as a drop-in one day, and I didn't know who he was. He was just, at the time he was just, the guy walking in off the street, and he asked if he could take the class. It was like an afternoon class, and I said, yeah, sure. I mean, have you ever done Muay Thai before? And he was like, yeah, I've done a little bit of it. And meanwhile, while he's taking the class, you could see that this guy really knew what he was doing. And after the class, he asked me if I wanted to like kick around. And in Muay Thai, that means, just, spar a little, like lightly, nothing crazy. And I'll never forget, like after the class, he was like, he gave me a heck of a time. And I was, at the time I had an ego. I thought I was the best, the best that I could possibly be. And, this guy that just showed up from nowhere from Milwaukee, who, I later found out that he was training with Duke Rufus out of Milwaukee. And he was just like, yeah, he was somebody who humbled me pretty early on in my, that was during my amateur career too.
And once you started like getting settled in there at the gym, like, did it take off right away in terms of the people coming off the street? Cause like Church Street, for those who don't know, like they have, many, pro amateur fighters, but also, it's open to people who just want to get a workout in. And I'm sure it was kind of a new lane that you were opening up for people in terms of, fitness and training in Muay Thai.
Yeah, definitely. Again, it was still definitely underground, but there was definitely a demand for it, I guess with, again, UFC kind of in its early stages. So this was like back around 2003. So it was still a little unknown, but you definitely had an underground, effect where people were just like, oh, I want to train this Muay Thai thing, right? And, there were a handful of fighters, not a lot of guys or girls that were fighting pro, but definitely a lot of, people that wanted to test their mettle in the ring. And yeah, it was, it was great because since Church Street or Justin Blair was running the Friday Night Fights promotion since like the early 2000s, it was definitely, it was a good combination of having a place to train, but then also having a place to test their skills.
And when you mentioned the French fighter in the UFC Muay Thai early days, you knocked out the sumo wrestler's tooth. It just kind of spurred my memory and made me think of a guy, King David Leduc, I believe the name is, who's sort of the king of Lethwei right now, which is not Muay Thai, but similar other than the headbutts. And I'd just be kind of curious of like your, I guess, thoughts on Lethwei and if you are a fan of it, and maybe if there's a lot of crossover between Muay Thai guys and Lethwei. I'd imagine more of a question because I'm just kind of curious to know more about it. I've been turned on to it recently and seen some interviews with David on Rogan and some other outlets. So,
well, it's funny you mentioned that because originally I got into Muay Thai. So now I guess it comes back to this street fight that I got into as a, young kid. Well, I was in my 20s, and I was doing all the things that probably I shouldn't be doing, and I found myself in a street fight that I almost could have got pummeled into the ground pretty much. And from that point on, like, I knew I never wanted to feel that weak and helpless again. So that's what actually spurred on the journey to get back into martial arts, because I had left it behind as a 15-year-old. And I came across, this Navy SEAL hand-to-hand combat course in in the, martial arts magazines. And I picked one up and I ordered this three tape series, a VHS tape series, had it sent to my mom's house. And what really stood out for me was the Muay Thai, right? Because all I wanted to do was make sure I'd never got my ass kicked in a street fight again. So it's funny you mentioned Lethway, because with the headbutts involved, like, that is super appealing, because what's more effective, not just using your hands, your feet, your knees, and your elbows, now incorporating another weapon that, potentially, if you ever, if you were in a life or death situation, that could, help you, so I see the attraction to it. But as far as it being a sport, it makes it a little harder to stomach, because headbutts are pretty darn easy. I've never fought with headbutts in the ring, but you get headbutted by mistake, so it definitely it changes the game.
Yeah, it just adds another element, because with Muay Thai, right, the art of eight limbs. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
So it's adding the head in there as well. You got 9 things to worry about. So yeah, crazy sport, but interesting. There's been some stuff on it recently, and I think all combat sports that get attention, the better, because I think combat sports as a whole right now is really growing. Boxing is entering like a really good stage, with the recent, Tyson Fury and Wilder trilogy being completed, and Canelo's helping to carry the sport. And there's a lot of young stars on the way up. And then the UFC as well is taking off and continuing to put out amazing cards. So it's all good. All high tides raise all ships, which is a good thing. And it's exciting times. But going to your pro career, first of all, what I'm interested in is, like, when a fighter decides he wants to be pro, and like, what's the motivation in going pro? What was it for you when you decided, all right, I want to, hit the pro ranks in Muay Thai? Was it just purely based off of, testing your skills? Was it this fear of getting into the ring and the professional element, like, attractive or intoxicating in a way for you once you got a taste of it? Like, walk me through those early days.
So it actually goes back to when I was a kid, when I was about 8 years old, where not only did my dad, introduce me to martial arts, which I'll always be grateful for that, but around that time, my dad started giving up on the family, right? He still is till this day. He's a gambling addict. So he started, I noticed at an early age that he started, neglecting, my mom, and neglecting me, and kind of just being in his own world. And again, even to this day, my dad is, I feel like he deals with some mental health issues, where he's very disconnected from the family. So from an early age, I just knew, right, that I wanted to make a name for myself. I didn't know that it was going to be in Muay Thai per se, but I just knew I wanted to make a name for the Romulo family and do something, to bring some kind of recognition. And, eventually I found Muay Thai. So when I was an amateur, I just knew that this was martial arts was for me. I knew this was something that was going to be a lifelong journey. And at the time, the timing was perfect, right? Being able to, fight for Team USA in Thailand, that was the deciding moment where I was like, okay, if I can hang with some of the best in the world, and win a bronze medal. I was blessed to win a bronze medal back in 2004. I was like, all right, if I can hang with some of the best people in the world. Let's take it to the next step, and let's you know, let's move on to the pro ranks and see what I can do. And even though, again, Muay Thai in New York or even the United States isn't, a huge sport, but I just knew that deep in my heart, this was something that really drove me and gave me some passion, and I wanted to take it as far as I could.
The experience of fighting and just being around the culture of Muay Thai fighters in Thailand has got to be incredible. I've seen some specials on showcasing some events, and the way there's live scoring, there's live betting in between rounds. It's a chaotic environment. There's music being played during the fights. What was that experience like, getting to get a taste of it in Thailand and that culture that is around the sport?
Oh man, that's definitely something I'll never forget. I spent a good 5 weeks of training in Thailand. It was at a gym that is no longer around. It's a pretty popular gym. The gym is called Fairtex, and it was in a part of Thailand. It wasn't in the city. It was in Bangkok, but kind of on the outskirts. So it was like in the country. So being able to be out there and just be secluded, and again, train with, foreign fighters, train with, native fighters, like kids. Literally, you're training with kids who have mounds of experience. Like they start training at 8 years old. They train twice a day, every day, or maybe 6 times out of the week. And it's not a hobby, it's not like just something that they pick up and they're just like, let me try this out. This is a way for them to combat, poverty and bring, some kind of financial stability to their families. So to train under those kinds of conditions, like it tested your heart, right? Because there were definitely times only in those 5 weeks where I was just like, how can I keep this up? I was about 29 years old, so I wasn't young, but I wasn't old. But I was like, man, how do people, how do these kids do this, for years on end, from 8 years old, and they do this into their 20s. But again, it was definitely a good gauge for my desire to learn and to be not just a fighter, but all in all, be a martial artist and continue that, to this day.
Did you feel like accepted by the Muay Thai culture out there right away, or was it more an approval once you proved that you could stand with those guys and win a bronze and medal at the cup there?
Well, it's funny, right? Because you mentioned boxing gyms, and obviously you mentioned before we jumped on here, Fifth Street Boxing Gym, and definitely the Muay Thai, I guess, protocol. I guess the best way to put it, it's just like the old school boxing gyms. You have to earn your respect in the gym first, right? So it took a few weeks for me to earn my respect in there with with the trainers, and actually the owner of the gym, who was like this, big time business guy. And, in Thailand, he has a lot of respect because he is a promoter as well. He would come out and watch me train, and, all my teammates and even some of the trainers, they were pretty surprised that he would come out and come and watch me. Like, I'm just this nobody from New York, right? But he would come out and watch, and sometimes he would give me instructions. So I definitely felt blessed that, I earned my respect in the gym because of all the, the hard work that I put in there. But as far as like competition wise, yeah, again, it was great to be able to test myself against, countries that I've never been to. And, and obviously in Europe and the rest of Asia, kickboxing is a lot bigger of a sport. So for Team USA to come out there in 2004 and put on a show and win golds, bronze, and silvers, yeah, it was just great to be a part of that back then.
The live scoring element of Muay Thai, I guess in the professional ranks, I don't know if it's also in the amateur, but kind of a hot topic right now across all combat sports. A lot of people are calling for it in the UFC and in boxing. Are you a supporter of that? And do you feel that it helps you as a fighter to know in between rounds where you stand, or can it hurt you at times?
I guess it could go either way. I mean, personally, I would not want to know. I kind of like the element of surprise. But then again, with some of the calls that you see, right, judges' decisions, and there are all these disputes about, what's the right, who's the guy or girl that's supposed to walk away the winner. I honestly, I don't. If I was still fighting, I would rather not know. I like the element of surprise and just believing in your skills and believing in how you feel in the fight, and just no matter what, just pushing yourself to the max in every round and in every fight. So I'm sure other people, find that I don't see the benefit in it for myself, but that's just me.
Okay. Well, as a guy who's, thrown thousands of kicks over the course of his life, your shins must be incredibly conditioned, right? And there's a lot of fighters recently, like most notably with McGregor and Chris Weidman, Anderson Silva. Not only have they, experienced a break mainly due to kicks, but also the calf kick in general in the UFC has become extremely popular right below the knee, kind of creating a dead foot or drop foot, I believe they call it. So it really just completely enables the leg, and it's become a really popular strike. I'd love to hear you kind of talk to that, and maybe if that kick exists a lot in Muay Thai, or maybe those guys are so conditioned or they know how to defend so well against it, and why is it happening so much in the UFC right now?
That is a good question. You don't see a lot of that in Muay Thai because of the risk. It's a high risk, even though it seems like a high reward. In Muay Thai, you do condition your shins, to the point where, not that you don't feel the pain, you feel the pain, but you're able to handle it differently, and you build up this callus around your lower legs. What I feel like happens a lot, the guys that are breaking their shins or breaking their ankles, there's so much in mixed martial arts. Obviously, there's so much to be trained. You got to train your boxing, your wrestling, your jujitsu, your kicking. So maybe sometimes there might be a neglect on proper lower leg conditioning. And again, Muay Thai fighters, they're constantly kicking bags, hard bags, kicking hard pads. They're sparring, even sometimes they're even sparring without shin pads to really, develop the shin to shin contact. So when you see a guy break their shin, I feel like it's because they just haven't trained the conditioning enough. So as far as seeing that in Muay Thai, you don't see it a lot because, when you go shin to shin, I don't know, have you ever gone shin to shin before?
Not full speed. There's a guy at the gym who just showed me, and he just gave me a little tap, and that was enough.
Yeah. So going shin to shin, you're not looking for that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But I got a funny story about that. When I went to a gym out in California back in 2003, and this was after I had a fight here in New York, or back in New York, that I won, and I smashed my shin up pretty good in that fight. I won the fight, but then like literally the next day I flew out to California for some training at a famous gym out there. And there was a guy in that gym. His name is Jungsunon, one of the famous, he's a legendary, golden era fighter from Thailand. And I spent 13 days training there, but I wasn't able to kick with my right leg because it was so banged up. So I just used my left leg pretty much the whole time. And I remember one day after one training session, I asked him, I was like, look, when do your shins ever stop hurting? And he told me, if you don't like pain, don't fight. That just, and his nickname is the Wooden Man, because when fighters used to hit him, they would say that it felt like they were kicking wood. So for that to come from a guy whose nickname is the Wooden Man, I was like, all right, I got you. It's just part of the journey, right? You're gonna feel the pain, but make sure you're conditioning first.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, these kicks that are happening are nuts. I mean, even this past weekend, a couple guys outside in the prelims it happened to, and then of course in the Gaethje and Michael Chandler fight, you saw Chandler's front left leg was just, oh my gosh, it was shredded early. So it's a big trend right now, and it's clearly working. So guys are going to have to start focusing more on their Muay Thai maybe to get over this.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's easier said than done, but the way to defend that is pretty simple. Like I've seen guys do it a couple of times, and or you just turn your foot out, plant your foot, and turn your shin out. And once the kicker feels that shin to shin contact, I'm sure they would have to change game plans or switch up.
Yeah, I don't want any part of the shin to shin contact. That is for sure crazy. But you're talking about the Woodman. There's a guy on that UFC card, Alex Pereira, who's a middleweight, former Glory kickboxing champion, and he's a guy who has beat Israel Adesanya, who's the current 85-pound champion UFC twice in kickboxing. And they say
Knocked them
that
out.
yeah, and they said that he's I think they're saying that he's made of mahogany. They said his whole body his whole body hits you with anything, it hurts. So guy to watch out for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did Glory ever have, or any organizations out there ever bring in Muay Thai, or is it usually pretty separate, or just Muay Thai organizations don't tend to blend with MMA or kickboxing promotions?
Oh no, there's definitely a good handful of Muay Thai fighters that are in Glory. I mean, Sittachai. I don't
Yeah,
know if yeah, Sittachai. And there's a couple other guys. I can't remember their names right now. Thai names are pretty long and hard to remember. But there's
yeah.
definitely there's a good staple of Muay Thai fighters in Glory that that are holding belts for sure.
But still under the kickboxing kind of banner, correct? It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
a, yeah,
Well, the Muay Thai guys definitely have to make an adjustment because of the 3 rounds. When Muay Thai fighters are more accustomed to fighting the 5 rounds, and in Muay Thai, there's like giveaway rounds, like the first 2 rounds you don't really fight because, like what you mentioned earlier, they give the bettors a time to gauge, who they want to put their money on. So there's a lot of intricacies in Muay Thai, but yeah, definitely they have to make adjustments because they can't, there's no time to give away rounds in a 3-round fight.
yeah. Yeah, it's there's another fight in one championship that I just remembered with Demetrius Johnson, who's fighting Demetrius Johnson, for people who don't know, former UFC champ, and he's over at One Now, and he's fighting a Muay Thai fighter. And I believe they're gonna do, which is crazy, they're gonna do first round Muay Thai, second round MMA, third round, and alternate. So the Muay Thai guy better get him in the first round, because if Demetrius gets out of there and takes him down in the second round, I don't think it's going to go well.
No, it's not going to go well. And it doesn't matter like how much, uh, grappling training that this Muay Thai fighter does. Like, I mean, you got to remember, like, how many fights does Demetrius Johnson have? Like, you're not gonna be able to stuff a takedown from a guy who's been taking guys down for years.
No, yeah, it's going to be, but a fun show, and it's good that they're mixing it up, keeping things interesting. But to go back to kind of what you said, just around Muay Thai as a whole, like obviously the shin to shin contact, the elbows, the knees, there's no padding there. So guys are dealing with some crazy, blows and a lot of intense violence really going on in the ring. So from a mental standpoint, like what were things that you did to prepare yourself mentally, or in fight, things you would tell yourself to overcome pain or adversity that to become a champion, which you did?
Well, mentally, it's just being aware, right? Knowing that, like what I was saying about Junction, like there was a point where I used to think that the pain would eventually go away, like your shins would never hurt. There's this myth that you kill off all the nerves in your shin so that you don't feel the pain anymore. But once he made it clear to me that the pain will always be there, having that awareness, now you can, understand this is just part of the sport. Kind of relates back to life, right? Like there's always going to be pain in life. Things are going to hurt, but if you deny it, right, then it hurts even more. But what you want to do is accept the pain, right, and learn how to, and then from there you can start, taking your training a little more. I wouldn't say seriously, but differently, right? Doing things that will lead you to develop not only the mental conditioning but also the physical conditioning behind that, making sure that you are hitting the hardest bag in the gym, or making sure that you are kicking pads and smacking your feet and your shins against these hard pads on a regular basis, doing the things and not straying away from the discomfort. I think what happens a lot is people want to stray away from the discomfort. You got to lean into it if you really want to condition your mind and your body.
Yeah, there's so much to like talk about around that. Like for myself too, like a big reason why I fell in love with just boxing and combat sports is like the inspiration you get from the fighters and the ability to overcome things. And a lot of people talk about putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, and it makes you comfortable in life. Callousing the mind, if you want to go the David Goggins route, which is great too. And I know you talk a little bit about that like throughout your podcast, right? And just kind of how the fight game parallels to life. And Teddy Atlas, I think he's like poetic the way he talks about how the fight game mirrors life, but it's really true, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even till this day, even though I haven't fought in the ring, since what is it? I retired in 2011. Like, yeah, daily reminders that, you're going to get clipped on the chin, right? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But, again, if you're, what I learned is you put yourself through and you don't shy away from these situations. It's, I'm drawing a blank on the term now. But you put yourself in situations where you're constantly testing not only you're testing your heart, right? You're leaning into fear and you're saying, all right, is this fear really going to kill me, or is it just going to make me stronger? So you can look at it in two ways, right? You can look at it as fear is going to hold you back, or you can look at it as, all right, this is going to build me up and this is going to make me a strong person as a father, as a husband, as a business person, so yeah, it's definitely, it definitely parallels, because every day is a fight. Once you roll out of bed, if you don't have that awareness that, someone or something is trying to hold you back, and you've got to find the way to keep moving forward, then that's when you start, fighting off of the ropes, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I know you're pushing that messaging on to a lot of kids now, right? With anti-bullying foundation that you run, and help kind of preach that message right through the gym, and get kids in there and doing positive stuff.
Yeah, actually, so now we've closed the gym since May 2020. So, we still have our scholarship students that we go back to see, back in our old neighborhood in Rockaway. But yeah, definitely, that was definitely the mission, when we were still running our gym, and when I was going out doing these motivational talks, that, yeah, life is a fight, and, the concept fall 7 times, stand up 8, right? You're going to get knocked down, but are you going to stay down, or are you going to find a way to keep moving forward in life?
Definitely. On the podcast side, I'm curious, your Champ Up podcast, I was checking out some of the episodes, pretty cool conversations on there. Is there any, I guess, topics or people you've talked to through your time doing that you feel like, had an impact on you, or just gave you a new perspective maybe on life or the fight game, or how to compete, or any kind of lessons you've learned through the podcast game?
Yeah, definitely. I would say my talk. Well, we were friends before we had the interview, but my interview with Jared Gordon of the UFC,
Yep.
and he has a story that will definitely inspire anybody. The challenges he went through as a kid, and how he's battled through that, and unfortunately it led him to substance and drug addiction, but now he's on a mission of his own. But it definitely makes you think. For me, I was just like, everybody thinks they've got it bad, but when you hear, when you're able to hear other people's stories who want to share with you, and you're just like, oh, okay, maybe what I'm going through or what I've been through, all right, as challenging as I thought as it was at the time, everybody's got their own story. And it's great to hear that, how people are able to still persevere no matter what. And I'm sure you hear it a lot on your own podcast that, not that hardship is easy, but it definitely builds you and makes you stronger.
100%. Yeah. Not only did, kind of going back to one of my first episodes I did with a guy, Fernando Villegas, and he was a producer for HBO's 24/7 series. And we had an awesome discussion just around one of the first ever episodes they did, which was Oscar De La Hoya and some of his fights, and just going back to storytelling and what they did so well over at HBO. And I think Showtime and DAZN and some of these new networks are doing a good job and providing some all access moments where you see the behind the scenes and behind the fighter and what's really going on in their life. And a lot of people draw a lot of inspiration from that, like a guy like Tyson Fury even recently, and what he's gone through and climbed back, and now he's back on top of the world. And those stories need to get out there. And I think hopefully my podcast, it definitely does it for me, talking to people and hearing their stories. So it's awesome that you got it going as well. And these stories can get out there and more people can get inspired. And the fight game is the best at doing that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, Fernando is a good friend of mine. And I did listen to a little bit of that episode with you and him. And yeah, I mean, think about the UFC. The UFC did that with the Ultimate Fighter, right? Bringing guys' stories to the forefront, attracted, not just the hardcore fans, but the general fans too. So definitely, it's huge to get those stories behind each and every fight that might be happening.
Most definitely. Well, Chris, it's been an awesome chat with you. I think people can learn a lot from your journey in Muay Thai and combat sports, and some things you've done outside the ring, which is awesome as well. So everyone, make sure to go check out the Champ Up podcast. And Chris, if you want to let them know where they can listen to that or what platforms to go check that out.
Oh, it's on, Spotify, Google, iTunes. So yeah, all the major podcasts, I'm sure, just like you. But appreciate it, Pat. Definitely appreciate the time.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it so much. And everyone go check them out on Instagram. We'll make sure to put it in the bottom of this video. And hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Thanks again.
Thank you.